They say you don't notice the exact moment the ground begins to crack beneath your feet. It starts subtly small shifts, tiny tremors you convince yourself are just in your head. That's how it began with Daniel. From the outside, our life looked picture perfect. We were the kind of couple people admired at dinner parties. We laughed in sync, dressed like a catalogue ad, and owned a charming beach house nestled along the Outer Banks of North Carolina, our little escape from the world. Daniel worked in finance, and I ran a modest but fulfilling interior design studio from home. We were stable, even if not always wildly passionate. We had comfort routine, and what I thought was mutual respect. At least I thought we did. I'm Olivia, by the way. 36 years old, the type who still handwrites thank you cards and gets excited about antique stores. I've always believed that love is something you nurture, something you commit to even when it feels boring. But love isn't enough if you're the only one trying. Looking back now, the signs were there, just blurred around the edges, hiding in plain sight. Like how Daniel stopped touching the small of my back when we crossed the street. How he flinched when I reached for his phone to check the weather, or how he started saying, "I just need some time to think more than I love you." Still, I ignored them. I told myself he was stressed. Work was demanding. Life was just busy. I wasn't naive. I just desperately wanted to believe that what we built was real, solid, unshakable. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday ordinary by every stretch. I made grilled salmon and set the table for two like I always did. Daniel came home late again, and when he did, he looked removed. Like his body was there, but his thoughts were on some far-off island. I watched him push the food around his plate, avoiding eye contact. Then he said it. "Liv, I have to go out of town for a few days." "There's a client summit in Charleston." I blinked. "This weekend?" "Yeah, I know it's last minute," he said, already looking at his phone. "Just came up." That was odd. Daniel always told me about his trips ahead of time. He was organized, methodical, almost to a fault. And Charleston. That wasn't one of his usual destinations, but I nodded, playing the supportive wife, biting back the unease rising in my chest. After dinner, while he showered, I picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. As I moved to hang it, something fell from the inside pocket, an envelope with our beach house address on it, along with printed directions. No company logo, no hotel reservation, no itinerary, just our beach house. I stood there for a full minute, my heart thudding in my ears. Maybe he was surprising me. Maybe he planned a romantic weekend and didn't want me to know. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind ran in circles, fighting with itself, half of me clinging to hope, the other half constructing scenarios too painful to bear. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed answers. The next day, I called into work and decided to do a little digging. Daniel's laptop was locked, but his iPad wasn't. It was synced to his cloud account. I scrolled through the photo albums, heart-racing eyes, scanning for something, anything that could confirm or deny what I feared. And then I saw it. A photo taken just a few days ago. Daniel seated at a small cafe by the coast, smiling. Across from him, only partially in frame, was a woman's arm resting lightly on the table. Red nails. A small familiar tattoo near the wrist. A rose. I remembered that tattoo. It belonged to a woman I met once briefly at a company party. Her name was Emily. She was charming in a calculated sort of way, too friendly, too flirty. I remembered the way she looked at Daniel that night. I remembered how she leaned in just a little too close, how he didn't pull back. I sat in silence, iPad still in my hands, staring at that half frame of truth. I felt the betrayal bloom in my chest like a cold fire. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something else rise in me, something colder, quieter. Clarity. I had no intention of confronting Daniel, not yet. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum or beg for answers. No, I was going to wait. Because if he was taking her to our beach house, my beach house, I was going to be there first. And I wouldn't be alone. I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't focus, couldn't fake normal. I just sat in the kitchen with my fingers wrapped around a coffee mug I never sipped from. My brain ran on overdrive. The photo, the envelope, the lie, none of it felt real yet. It was like watching my marriage crack in slow motion, but the sound hadn't caught up to the break. One question kept repeating itself in my head, like a stuck record, why her? And then another thought slipped in, uninvited but powerful. She has a husband. Emily. The woman with the red nails, the tiny rose tattoo, and the kind of nerve it takes to walk into another woman's life and treat it like a weekend getaway. She wasn't single. I remembered her mentioning her husband in passing during that company party. His name was Marcus, I think. A tall, quiet man with intelligent eyes and the kind of smile that didn't come easily. I remember thinking he looked like someone who didn't miss much, and that gave me an idea. I wasn't going to confront Daniel with tears or ultimatums. I wanted something different, something quiet, surgical. I needed someone who had just as much to lose, and maybe just as much resolve to do something about it. It took less than 10 minutes of scrolling through LinkedIn and Facebook before I found him. Marcus Whitmore, tech consultant, based in Raleigh. Still married to Emily, his relationship status hadn't changed. He looked older in his recent profile photo than I remembered, a bit worn down. Or maybe I just noticed it now, that I was looking through a different lens, one cracked by betrayal. I hesitated. What was I about to do? Was this petty? Was this cruel? But the answer came quickly. No, this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about truth, about understanding, and perhaps, if I was being honest, about not feeling so terribly alone in this. So I sent him a message, short, careful, measured. Hi Marcus, I'm not sure if you remember me, Olivia Dawson, Daniel's wife. I think we need to talk. It's about Emily and Daniel. I'm sorry to be the one to say this. He read it within 10 minutes. The reply came 20 minutes later. I remember. Let me know when and where. We met at a small coffee shop in Durham, about halfway between our homes. I wore dark glasses and a beige coat, like I was trying to blend into the wallpaper. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early, already seated with a black coffee and a furrowed brow. He looked up when I walked in, and his eyes softened the moment they met mine. Olivia, he said, standing politely, pulling out a chair for me. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward him, already open to the photo of our spouses having coffee at the coast. He stared, not blinking, not breathing, it seemed. That's recent, he said quietly. 3 days ago. He looked up at me, something flickering behind his eyes, pain, yes, but also clarity. Recognition. I had a feeling he said, she's been distant, secretive, and this trip, she told me she was going to visit a friend in Asheville. So did Daniel, I said, only he said he was going to a client meeting in Charleston. But then I found this. I pulled the printed directions from my purse, folded neatly, Daniel's handwriting scrawled across the bottom. It was unmistakably to our beach house. Marcus exhaled slowly, then sat back in his chair. So what now, he asked. Do we blow it up, show up screaming? Expose them to the world? I shook my head. No. That's what they'd expect. That gives them drama. That gives them something to twist into a story, where they're the victims. I want something different. What do you have in mind? I leaned forward. I want us to be waiting. At the beach house. Calm, silent. No yelling, no theatrics. Just present. Let them walk into what they think is their little fantasy escape, only to find the reality they tried to bury sitting right there on the couch. His lips curled slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. That's cold, he said. It's fair, I replied. We planned everything down to the last detail. They were scheduled to arrive on Friday afternoon just before sunset. We'd drive down Thursday night, check in, clean the house, and leave everything exactly the way Daniel liked it. Cozy lighting, wine glasses, ready, a playlist already queued. everything would look perfect. Until it wasn't. Marcus would park his car out of sight down the road, and we'd be inside, waiting me in the living room, him in the kitchen, both silent, both still, like shadows returning to reclaim the space that was stolen from us. I wasn't looking for an apology. I didn't believe either of them would offer one, but I wanted them to look us in the eyes and know we knew. We weren't blind, we weren't weak. We were simply giving them enough rope to hang their illusions. That night, as I packed my suitcase with a strange kind of steadiness, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look heartbroken. I looked composed, focused, like a woman who finally saw things clearly. I didn't need closure. I needed truth, and I was going to get it. Not with words, not with tears, with silence and presence, and 2 chairs waiting in the living room of a beach house that wasn't theirs to ruin. The beach house had always been my favorite place in the world. Tucked along the edge of a quiet, wind-washed stretch of Carolina shore, it wasn't extravagant, just 2 bedrooms, worn wooden floors, and a back deck that opened up to the ocean. But it was ours. Or at least I thought it was. Daniel and I had spent years making it our haven weekend getaways, anniversary dinners, lazy afternoons tangled in fleece blankets, and the scent of salt in the air. That house had held laughter-love memories. Now it was about to hold something else entirely. Marcus picked me up Thursday afternoon just before dusk. It felt strange sliding into a car with a man I barely knew, bonded only by shared betrayal. But silence settled between us easily. Not the awkward kind, but the kind born of mutual understanding, like our souls recognized each other's bruises without needing to speak them aloud. The drive was long, winding through pine forests and down familiar coastal roads that once meant freedom and now tasted faintly of bitterness. Still, the sky was clear, and the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting everything in a soft gold, beautiful even now. We arrived at the house just after dark. I hadn't been back since spring. The porch light still flickered like always, the key still tucked behind the 3rd flower pot to the left. I hesitated for just a second before unlocking the door, half expecting to feel some wave of emotion crash over me. But there was only stillness. Cold, silent, watching stillness. Marcus walked in behind me and looked around. "It's nice," he said, a quiet compliment. I nodded. I used to love it here. We worked quickly. Everything had to look untouched, welcoming, romantic. I lit the lavender candles I knew Daniel liked, set the table with 2 wine glasses, even pulled out the playlist we used on our anniversary, the year before soft jazz, the kind that made everything feel warm and expensive. It felt disgusting and perfect all at once. We set our bags in the spare room far from the master bedroom where they'd undoubtedly intend to go, and then checked the fridge, the lights, the cameras we'd discreetly positioned to record the entrance. Not for evidence. Just for us, for when we wanted to remind ourselves later that we weren't crazy, that we were there, that it happened exactly the way we remembered. It was nearly midnight when everything was in place. We sat in the living room, lights low, the ocean humming beyond the windows. I curled into the corner of the couch, while Marcus took the armchair, stretching his legs out, arms folded. "Do you think they'll even be surprised?" he asked after a while. "I think they're so deep in the fantasy," I said, "that they've stopped considering the real world entirely." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Funny, isn't it? How they have to sneak around pretending it's passion, while we're the ones actually doing the hard work of loving them." His words hit harder than I expected. I looked at him. "You still love her?" He didn't answer right away. Then I love who she was. Who I thought she was. But I don't know if that woman's still in there. I understood that feeling too well. I didn't even know what I felt for Daniel anymore. There wasn't heartbreak exactly, just a hollowing out like someone had scooped out something important in me and left the shell to stand. "I think love can survive pain," I said, "but not contempt. And right now, I can't look at him without feeling disgusted." We didn't talk much after that. Sleep came fitfully broken into shallow stretches. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind outside, had me snapping awake, wondering, is it time, are they here? But the night passed quietly, and morning brought only grey light and the restless tide. By late afternoon Friday, we were ready. Marcus made coffee. I rechecked the cameras. We positioned ourselves in the living room like statues in a museum still composed unreal. I wore the green dress Daniel always said made me look dangerous in a good way. It wasn't for him now. It was for me. To feel strong, grounded, like I was in control of the moment, even as my world collapsed around me. At exactly 4 to 12 p.m., we heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heartbeat jumped to my throat. Marcus looked at me, his expression unreadable. I nodded. Let's do this. We didn't move from our spots. We didn't peek through the blinds. We just sat there, waiting. The front door clicked open. Laughter spilled in first hers light and high-pitched like a songbird unaware it had flown into a wolf's den. Then footsteps, 2 sets, their voices carefree, flirty, intoxicated by the thrill of stolen time, until they saw us, until their illusion shattered against the stillness of that room. When Daniel froze in the doorway, Emily just behind him, her arm still linked with his mouth opened slightly as if about to speak, but no words came. Emily gasped, her hand flew to her mouth. I met Daniel's eyes, and for the first time in our marriage, he looked genuinely terrified. Time didn't stop. It stretched, like molasses spilling off the edge of the counter, slow, inevitable, and impossible to clean up. Daniel just stood there in the doorway, blinking his brain, trying to process what his eyes were screaming at him. Emily dropped her beach tote. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, followed by an unbearable silence. Her red lips, just moments ago laughing now, formed a stunned trembling. Oh. Marcus was the first to speak. Welcome home, he said flatly, his voice like cold steel wrapped in velvet. No one responded. Daniel glanced at me as if hoping this was a dream, or worse, a trap he could somehow charm his way out of. But I didn't flinch. I sat there, back straight, legs crossed at the knee, like the woman I had forgotten I could be calm, composed, in control. This was my house. Liv, Daniel finally managed, his voice cracking. This isn't what it looks like. That old line, that pathetic recycled lie. I tilted my head slightly and said nothing. I wanted him to squirm in the silence. I wanted him to feel every degree of tension in the air, the heat in his collar, the weight of Marcus's gaze, the emptiness in mine. Emily, now ghost pale, took a step forward. Marcus, I didn't mean for you to find out like this. No, Marcus said evenly. You meant for me not to find out. Let's be clear. Daniel tried again. This is a misunderstanding. We would just spare me, I interrupted, voice quiet but razor sharp. Daniel, please, let's not insult each other further. He froze, because I never interrupted him before, not like that. Did you enjoy pretending this house was yours to give? I asked. Was it fun to rewrite our life as some secret fantasy for you and her? Daniel's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Marcus stood slowly, walked toward them, and stopped just a few feet away. His jaw clenched. I thought I married someone decent, he said to Emily. I thought we had problems we could fix. Turns out you were the problem. Emily's mascara had already begun to smudge. Marcus, please, no, he said, eyes narrowing. You don't get to cry right now. You don't get to play the part of the victim. I stood then too, slow, deliberate. I crossed the room and stopped right beside Daniel. He looked at me like he was bracing for a slap, but I just stared at him, calm as the tide. Everything you thought was hidden, I said, was actually visible to anyone who cared enough to see. He said nothing, because what could he say? He'd already said too much to her, and not enough to me. I'm filing for divorce, I said simply. That got his attention. His head jerked toward me, eyes wide, voice rising. Wait, Liv, please don't do this. We can work through this. I made a mistake. One mistake, I raised an eyebrow. Is that what you're calling this, one weekend, one slip? He hesitated, because he knew I knew better. Do you remember, I asked, voice dropping low, our 5th anniversary, when you stood in this house, with wine in one hand and my hand in the other, and told me this place was where your soul rested? He nodded slowly, cautiously. Well, I said, stepping back, you don't get to rest here anymore. Emily reached for Marcus's arm. He stepped back. I'm staying with my sister, he told her, and my lawyer will be in touch. She started crying, then loud, messy, frantic. But it was too late for noise. Too late for drama. The reckoning had already begun, and no amount of tears could drown it. Daniel looked at me one last time. He looked small, shrunken. Not the man I once loved, just a shell. A liar caught under the weight of his own arrogance. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just turned and walked toward the door. Marcus followed. We left them standing there in the middle of the living room, exactly where they deserved to be exposed. On the drive back, neither of us spoke much. The silence felt different now, not tense, but freeing. A cleansing kind of quiet. At one point, Marcus said softly, "You were incredible back there." I gave him a tired smile. I just did what needed to be done. He nodded. Still, you were strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt exhausted, but in a strange way, I also felt clean, like I had finally shed a skin I'd outgrown years ago. That night, I checked into a small hotel near the marina. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the moonlight ripple across the water. No tears came. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer controlled me, and that more than anything was what I wanted them both to see. They hadn't broken me. They had freed me. You always imagine the hardest part is the confrontation. The moment the truth explodes into the open, shattering everything you thought was safe and sacred. And yes, that moment is hard, but no one tells you about the after, the quiet that follows, the way silence settles into your bones, the hollow ache that lingers, not for the person you lost, but for the life you thought you had. That night in the hotel, I stared at the ceiling long after the lights were off, trying to remember how it felt to be loved by Daniel. Not the filtered version, not the date night version we showed to friends, but the quiet, true version. The truth was, I couldn't. That realization stung more than his betrayal. The next morning, I filed for divorce. It wasn't dramatic. No slamming of phones, no weeping into legal documents. I walked into the attorney's office with a folder of evidence, including the date-stamped photos, the call logs, the texts I'd forwarded from Daniel's iPad. The lawyer barely blinked. He made it easy, she said, flipping through the folder. Yes, he had. In some twisted way, I was grateful. If he had tried to deny it, if he had lied better, I might have hesitated. I might have questioned myself. But he made it so simple. His betrayal was loud, obvious, and well documented. There was no going back, and I didn't want to. The first few weeks were strange. I returned to the city and moved into a temporary apartment, small, quiet, with big windows and empty white walls. The kind of place that felt both lonely and full of possibility. Friends called. Some offered sympathy. Others asked with whispered curiosity, "Is it true? Did you really catch them like that?" As if betrayal became more exciting when served with wine and gossip. I told them enough to satisfy their concern, but not enough to feed the drama. I didn't need to relive it. I didn't want to become the woman whose husband cheated. That wasn't going to be my headline. I went back to work. Designing homes was the one thing that still made sense. Picking colors, arranging spaces, creating warmth from nothing that was my language. And for the first time in a long time, I poured myself into my projects, like I was rebuilding myself through every living room I reimagined. One Saturday, about a month after everything unraveled, I drove past the beach house. I didn't go inside. I just parked across the road and stared at it from a distance. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. It looked like a memory sealed in glass. I don't know if Daniel had gone back there. I didn't ask. All I knew was that it didn't feel like home anymore. And that was okay, because something else had started to happen. I was remembering who I was before us. I started doing little things I'd stopped doing in marriage, sleeping in the middle of the bed, listening to loud music while I cooked, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. It sounds silly maybe, but those were the things I'd quietly given up over the years. Tiny freedoms I handed over without noticing until I couldn't recognize myself in my own reflection. And now, they were coming back. Slowly, beautifully. Wise, Marcus and I kept in touch, though not often. A message here, a check-in there. We weren't building something romantic. We both knew we needed time to heal in our own ways. But there was a quiet understanding between us, a sort of unspoken companionship that came from sharing a wound no one else could quite understand. He sent me a message one evening. She moved out last week. Final papers signed. I'm finding peace again. Hope you are too. I stared at that message for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. That was growth. One morning, I looked in the mirror and realized something had changed. Not just my expression or the clothes I wore, but something deeper. A shift in my posture. A new kind of strength behind my eyes. I no longer looked like a woman holding her breath. I looked like someone who had survived. People always say that time heals all wounds, but I don't agree. Time reveals. It shows you who they really were. And more importantly, it shows you who you really are. Daniel's affair didn't destroy me. It stripped away the illusion that I needed him to be whole, and in its place it left something stronger, me. There's a kind of beauty in starting over that no one tells you about. Not the glossy kind you see in movies, no grand montages or miraculous epiphanies. No neat little bows tied around pain, no dramatic declarations in the rain. Just quiet moments, subtle shifts, a slow return to yourself piece by delicate piece. That's what healing really looks like, and that's where I was. Olivia. It began with mornings. Mornings were the hardest when I lived with Daniel. The silence in the kitchen, the rush of his suit jacket over the back of a chair, the way he answered emails before kissing me good morning. I used to wake up anxious, already anticipating distance, already bracing for cold. But now mornings were mine. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd brew my own coffee stand barefoot near the window of my little apartment and feel the warmth of the cup seep into my palms. I watched the city come alive, listened to birdsong instead of voicemail alerts, and somewhere in the stillness, I felt a part of me return. I started journaling. Nothing poetic or structured, just scribbles, frustrations, reflections, and little things I was grateful for. Some days it was simple. The sun felt warm today. Other days it was raw. I wish he hadn't wasted so much of me. But every page became a release. It helped me see my healing in slow motion. I wasn't trying to erase the pain. I was just learning how to carry it differently. One afternoon, I passed a used bookstore tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. Something about it called to me, maybe the dusty windows, or the handwritten sign that said, "Come get lost." I walked in and was instantly wrapped in the scent of old paper and forgotten stories. I ended up spending hours there. I left with 4 books, none of which I had planned to buy. That was the thing. I was starting to make choices just for me again. Not because they made sense, not because someone else would approve, just because they made me feel something. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I felt curious, or spontaneous, or alive. Jogshy said yes to dinner with friends again. For a while after the fallout, I avoided social settings like the plague. I didn't want the sideways glances, the pitying smiles, the inevitable, "You doing okay?" questions that hung heavy even when well-meaning. But slowly, I let people back in. Not everyone. Just the ones who saw me without trying to fix me. People who could sit with my silence, laugh at my half-healed jokes, and remind me that joy didn't need permission, it just needed space. Or I changed my hair. Not because of him. I hate that cliché. I changed it because I looked in the mirror one day and realized the woman staring back didn't match the one I was becoming. So I chopped it, colored it, lightened everything. It was subtle but symbolic. The old me wore armor. The new me didn't need it anymore. One evening, I visited the beach alone. Not that beach, not the house, just a quiet stretch of coastline a few hours south. I parked my car, kicked off my shoes, and walked the shoreline until the sky turned pink and the horizon blurred with memory. I sat on the sand with my knees pulled to my chest and let the wind carry away what was left of him in my mind. No rituals, no dramatic goodbyes, just a soft whispered truth. You don't live here anymore. And I wasn't talking about the house. It was around this time I started dreaming again. Not the kind that happens in sleep, the kind where you allow yourself to imagine more than just survival. I started thinking about taking my design business freelance, maybe even opening a boutique studio, something small, soulful, something that felt like mine. For years I had played safe, deferred, made myself small to make someone else feel big, but now I wanted more. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't afraid of that. Marcus and I met for coffee once more. Just once. Not to rehash the past, not to open old wounds. Just to check in. He looked healthier, lighter. We didn't talk about Emily or Daniel. We talked about music, about books, about the ridiculous joy of finding the perfect sandwich on a random Tuesday. Before we parted, he looked at me and said, "You seem whole." I smiled. I'm getting there. And that was enough. They say rock bottom teaches you things mountaintops never will. And they're right, because somewhere in the wreckage of Betrayal, I found something I didn't know I'd lost myself. It started with a blank notebook. I bought it on a whim, leather-bound, thick cream pages, the kind that whispered possibility when you held it. I told myself it was for ideas, sketches maybe, or client notes. But I knew better. That notebook was the seed of something bigger. I just didn't know it yet. Until one rainy afternoon, as I sat by my apartment window, I wrote 4 words across the top of a fresh page, Olivia Dawson Design Studio. And I didn't stop writing after that. I'd always had a gift for creating spaces that made people feel safe. That was my superpower. I saw not just walls and furniture, but stories. I could walk into a room and know exactly what it needed to breathe again. But for years, I had used that gift in the shadows. As Daniel climbed the corporate ladder, I stood behind him quietly, like the supportive wife I was raised to be. My design work was a side project, a hobby, something cute and creative I did between dinners and company events. But now it was a calling, and I was done asking for permission to answer it. Hasanot Jukrar. I started small. I turned the second bedroom in my apartment into a studio, paint samples, on-the-wall fabric swatches and baskets, a big drafting table I found at an estate sale for half price. My laptop balanced on stacked design books. The window open always. I reached out to old clients, told them I was going solo. And slowly, beautifully, the work began to roll in. One home office makeover, a small apartment refresh, then a full townhouse renovation. Each project gave me back a piece of myself. With every space I transformed, I felt less like a woman recovering from betrayal, and more like a woman becoming. One morning, a client handed me a check and said with a warm smile, "You have a real gift, Olivia. I feel like I can breathe in my home now." I held that compliment close, because for so long I hadn't been able to breathe in mine. I wasn't chasing success for revenge. It wasn't about Daniel anymore. It wasn't about showing anyone I could rise. It was about standing in a space I built with my name on the door, and knowing that every inch of it was mine, not borrowed, not shared, not dependent on someone else's spotlight. Mine. About 6 months after the confrontation at the beach house, I found a tiny storefront in a quiet street downtown. It wasn't flashy, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt it the bones of something special. Exposed brick, soft natural light, just enough space for a design table, a gallery wall, and a cozy seating area, with tea and soft jazz in the background. I signed the lease that day. No hesitation, no second guessing. For the first time in my life, I trusted my own instinct more than anyone else's opinion. The opening was small and intimate, just close friends, a few clients, and a tray of lemon tarts from the bakery next door. As I stood behind the front window, watching people admire the layout I'd spent weeks perfecting, I felt something shift. Not like fireworks or some cinematic swell of music, but like a door quietly unlocking inside me. Freedom, rooted, quiet, mine. Later that night, I sat on the studio couch barefoot sipping chamomile tea while watching the reflections of streetlights dance across the wood floor. My name, Olivia Dawson Design Studio, glowed in soft gold lettering on the window. It wasn't just a business. It was a declaration. I am still here. I have a life beyond the ruins. And I'm done living in the shadows. Wag Daniel had reached out once. Just a short email. No apology, just a vague line. "Hope you're doing well." I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because I'd finally reached a place where his voice didn't matter anymore. Silence was my reply, and that silence said everything. One evening, as I was closing up, Marcus stopped by. He was passing through, he said, just wanted to see the space. I offered him tea, and we sat on the couch like old friends. He looked around, smiling softly. "You did it," he said. "I did," I nodded, and not in spite of what happened, because of it. He looked at me with something like admiration. "I'm glad we went through it together." "So am I said, and I meant it. We didn't talk about the past that night. We talked about new books, future travel plans, the joy of sleeping in your own bed. We laughed. We sat in easy silence. It was gentle, whole, human. He left with a hug and no promises, just peace. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I think the best revenge is simply moving on, thriving, waking up one morning and realizing you haven't thought about them in weeks. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because you're finally too full of your own life to make space for theirs. One morning in early spring, I woke up and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not a dramatic realization. Not a cinematic moment. Just quiet clarity like a fog lifting. I sat at my window, coffee in hand, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun break through the morning clouds. The air smelled like rain and blooming jasmine. I felt still. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of what had been done to me. I had let it go, not for him, but for me. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It meant choosing to stop pouring energy into a fire that no longer burned. It meant releasing myself from the emotional contract that kept me tethered to someone who had broken his promises long before I found proof. Healing, I learned, isn't about erasing the pain. It's about creating something stronger in its place. Now I started saying yes to new things. A cooking class I always wanted to try. A trip to Portland with 2 girlfriends I hadn't seen in years. A solo weekend hike where I left my phone in the car and just listened to birdsong to wind to my own thoughts. Every yes became a brick in the foundation of my new life. I was building something, and this time I wasn't building it for someone else to walk into and take for granted. This life, this peace was mine. People still asked me sometimes if I'd consider dating again. For a while I avoided the question. I wasn't sure. Love had become a fragile concept like crystal glass, beautiful, but prone to shatter. But eventually I began to believe something softer. That love wasn't the enemy. That misplaced love was. So I didn't swear it off. I didn't become bitter. I simply raised my standards. I promised myself that the next time I opened my heart, it wouldn't be because I needed someone. It would be because I chose them, and they'd have to choose me back completely. No secrets, no masks, no halfway love. One Sunday, while walking through the local market, I passed a little antique jewelry stall. A silver ring caught my eye, simple, elegant, engraved with the Latin word fortis, strong. I slipped it onto my finger without hesitation. I didn't need a man to give me a ring. I could claim my own strength. And I wore that ring like armor, not to protect me from love, but to remind me that I didn't have to fear being alone ever again. Because I wasn't. I had me. Eventually, word made its way to me about Daniel. He moved out of state, tried starting over. He and Emily didn't last. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. And that was the greatest victory of all. Because when you truly heal, the people who hurt you lose their power. They become a chapter in a story that no longer defines you. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because so many women sit in silence, thinking they're the only ones. Thinking that being cheated on, being lied to, being cast aside, somehow reflects their worth. It doesn't. What someone else did to you says everything about them and nothing about you. You can rebuild. You can reclaim your joy, your voice, your life, not out of revenge, but out of respect for yourself. The beach house, I sold it. It was never really a home after what happened, not because of the walls, but because of the memories etched into them. And with that sale, I bought something new. A little cottage just outside the city. Modest, sunlit quiet, with a garden in the back and space for a hammock under a tree. I planted lavender, rosemary, and white daisies along the path to the front door. When I walk that path every evening, I don't think about the life I lost. I think about the life I chose. And maybe someday love will find its way back to me. Maybe it already is in the smile of a stranger, the warmth of a good conversation, the quiet hum of contentment in my chest. But I'm in no rush, because the greatest love story I've ever lived is the one where I saved myself. A few months after I moved into the cottage, I was invited to speak at a local women's group, just a small circle of entrepreneurs and creatives who met monthly at a cozy bookstore downtown. The invitation came through a client who knew bits and pieces of my story. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't polished or profound. I was just a woman who had been through something messy and real. But then, I thought about the version of me from a year ago, the one who felt small and voiceless, staring at a man who had rewritten their future without asking. What would she have wanted to hear? So I said yes. Kia. The night of the event, I stood at the front of the little reading nook in that bookstore, with shelves towering behind me and string lights glowing overhead. The room smelled like paper and peppermint tea. There were maybe 20 women in the audience, notebooks in their laps, open faces, kind eyes. And I told them the truth. Not the dramatized version, not the polished highlight reel, just the truth. About the beach house. About the moment I realized I deserved better. About how quiet revenge can be the most powerful kind. About rebuilding, not in spite of the pain, but through it. I spoke the words I once needed to hear. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not broken beyond repair. I didn't cry. But a few of them did. Afterward, women came up to me one by one, some with hugs, others with whispered confessions. That happened to me too. I haven't told anyone yet, but I thought I was the only one. And I realized something. This pain I'd carried, this fire I'd walked through. It wasn't just a wound. It was a bridge. In the weeks that followed, I got more messages, invitations, coffee meetups, emails from strangers who'd heard about the woman with the beach house story. I wasn't famous. I wasn't viral. But my honesty resonated in quiet corners of people's lives, and that was enough. I began writing small blog entries late at night, short reflections about healing independence, rediscovering self-worth. I posted them on my design studio's site, not expecting anyone to really read them. But they did. Not just clients, not just friends, women from all over, men too. People who had been through their own brand of betrayal, their own private unravelings. They thanked me for saying what they couldn't yet say aloud. And slowly, something shifted. I was no longer just telling my story. I was living into it, owning it, growing from it, letting it become something useful. That's the strange gift of pain. If you let it, it becomes purpose. Not overnight, not easily, but deeply. I started hosting small gatherings in my cottage. Nothing big, just a few chairs, candles, music, tea. Safe spaces for people to talk about hard things, to cry, to laugh, to stop hiding. We didn't call it therapy. We just called it real. One evening after everyone left, I stood in the doorway of my living room barefoot, holding a cup of tea, and looked around. The walls were soft ivory, lined with art from women-owned shops. The bookshelf was full of stories I hadn't yet lived. The windows were open, letting in the scent of lavender from the garden. And it hit me, I had created a home again. Not just a house. Not just a roof. A home. And it had nothing to do with square footage, or shared mortgages, or who did the dishes. It was about peace, and I had built it from the rubble of everything that tried to break me. One of the last messages I got that spring came from a woman I didn't know. It read, "I found your blog at 2 a.m. after crying in my car because my fiancé cheated. I haven't told anyone yet, but after reading what you wrote, I think I'm going to be okay. Thank you." I closed my laptop, slowly held that message in my heart, and whispered to no one in particular. That's why I tell the story, not for pity, not for vengeance, but for her, the woman curled up in her car with the world falling apart, wondering if she'll ever feel whole again. I want her to know, yes, you will, and when you do, you'll be stronger than you ever thought possible. Summer arrived quietly that year. There was no dramatic shift in the air, no sweeping transformation, just sunlight lingering a little longer on the windowsill, bees humming in the lavender, the soft rhythm of a new life settling into place. And I realized, this was it. This was the life I had fought for. Not loud, not perfect, but mine. Most mornings now, I woke up to birdsong instead of silence. No tension hanging in the air. No wondering who he was texting. No waiting for a version of love that had long stopped existing. I no longer lived in fear of being left, because I had finally stopped abandoning myself. Oh, the Olivia who once cried silently in hotel rooms, who rehearsed her pain behind polite smiles, who questioned if she was too much or not enough. She no longer lived here. She evolved. She rebuilt. She reclaimed her softness without sacrificing her strength. On my birthday, I threw a garden party. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, just to celebrate being alive and free. A handful of close friends came, people who had stayed through the storm. We ate under string lights and laughed over pasta I'd made from scratch. There was music, wine, and the kind of conversations that make you feel both known and new. At one point, someone toasted to new beginnings that don't wait for perfect endings. Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled quietly to myself. Yes, that was it. I hadn't fallen in love again. Not yet, but I was open to it now. Not with desperation, not with broken pieces wrapped in hope, but with a whole heart. A heart that no longer sought someone to rescue it, only someone worthy of standing beside it. Maybe he'll arrive in a bookstore, maybe over coffee, maybe not for years, maybe never. And that's okay, because I learned something vital: I am already enough. With or without a partner, with or without applause, just as I am. A few weeks later, I went back to the beach. Not that beach, a different one. No history attached, no ghost to greet me. Just an open horizon and a breeze that smelled like freedom. I walked the shoreline at sunrise, toes in the surf, listening to the waves roll in like steady reminders. You're still here. You've made it this far. And this piece, you built it. At one point, I sat in the sand and closed my eyes, and I said the words I once thought I'd never be able to say: "Thank you, Daniel." Not for what he did, but for what it forced me to become. He cracked the illusion, and from that fracture I rose, wiser, fiercer, softer, whole. Sometimes people ask me if I'd do it differently, if I could go back, would I change anything? And the truth is, no. Not because the pain was easy, but because it led me here. To this life, to this clarity, to this unshakable sense of self, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. So here I am, not bitter, not broken, just me. Standing on the other side of betrayal wrapped in grace, holding a life made not from revenge but from resilience. And if you're in that place right now, if you're still in the ache, still unsure if you'll ever feel like you again, hear me when I say this: you will. Not all at once, not easily, but beautifully, because the moment you decide you're worth more, everything begins to change. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about returning to yourself, and if I can find my way back, so can you.